Hey everyone, CJ here. I have a very special episode of Crash Labs. I'm here at Beaver Creek for the Precious Metal Summit, and with me today I have Brandon Macdonald. I think everyone knows this guy,
Everyone?
the zinc god.
Yeah, the zinc god. Not anymore.
Zinc Jesus.
Yes,
He will
yeah.
rise again.
Yeah.
There we go. You like it?
Yeah, well, we at Fireweed, the chief geo, Jack Milton, because of his beard and long hair,
Yeah.
is referred to as geological Jesus. So that's a good one to know. He's super good. He's actually earned that title.
Yeah, he's the English guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I spoke to him in the past.
Yeah.
He has a great reputation.
Yeah. Well,
Did he go to UBC?
Yeah, he did his PhD there. So he's
Yeah.
Camborne School of Mines in the UK, and
Yeah.
then his PhD in UBC.
And that MDRU has that unit where everyone knows each other. And
Yeah. I know. Actually, it was MDRU that recommended him to me, so it ended up being pretty fortuitous hiring at the time.
Your background is geology as well.
Yeah.
At UBC.
Yep. Yeah. So, my family had worked in exploration my entire life, right?
Yeah.
So I got my start staking claims and doing soil samples with my dad when I was 15 years old, up in the Yukon. And that led to, actually, I went to UBC and I was going to study chemistry. I don't even know why I chose chemistry. It really didn't have my mind made up, but I spent my summers still working with my dad.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, why am I not doing this, right? So I switched to geology and finished my undergrad there.
Did you grow up in the Yukon? Or
Yeah, we lived there till I was about 5.
Okay.
And then we moved to British Columbia.
Cool.
But I was, back up there quite a bit. We had family there, and I spent good portion of my career there, right? So
Yeah.
between teenager with my dad, and then through school, a lot of Yukon work, and then some about a decade ago before Fireweed, and then obviously with Fireweed for about 8 years. Spent a lot of time up there.
Did you always know that you were gonna work in the Yukon on the exploration front?
No, but it's amazing geological prospectivity there. And obviously a very storied place for mining, and being from there, and I think anyone who works there tells you that you spend some time there and you just keep wanting to go back,
Yeah.
right? So, I had spent 8 years in London, came back to Canada. I ended up doing some work in Yukon, kind of returning to my roots, and met my wife there. So she's born in Whitehorse as well. So all that time abroad, and I ended up marrying a woman born in the same hospital as me.
Nice.
It's a real important place in our hearts, and the fact that I'm from there is how I got the Fireweed gig. It's an interesting story, because I was working for Rob McLeod at IDM Mining.
Yeah.
And Rob had been approached by a broker at Haywood who knew some guys who were trying to put this zinc deal together in Yukon, and neither of them wanted to run it. As we were discussing on the street with some friends of ours just now, it's hard to be a CEO, right? And so these guys were further along in their career, and so they wanted someone with a bit more energy perhaps to run it.
Yeah.
And so this broker reached out to Rob. Rob suggested me, and one of the founders, George Gorzinski, an amazing guy, a geologist also, met with me for coffee. I think it was the Cejay Skui. How do you pronounce
Cejay
it?
on 800 West Pender.
Yeah, the one that's no longer there. Right?
Yeah.
So
I used to work out of that building.
Oh yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
the Discovery Group office. So we met there, and he'd been told a little bit about me, and he said, I hear you've done some work in the Yukon. I'm like, oh, yeah, I've done a lot of work up there. I'm from there. It's like, oh, you're from there. That's super interesting. Have you ever been to the village of Ross River? And for context, Ross River is about a 4 to 5 hour drive outside of Whitehorse. Very much middle of nowhere. 300 people, mostly indigenous. A lot of people in the exploration industry pass through there because there's quite a bit of interesting projects in their traditional territory. So I said to George, I've been to Ross River because that's my hometown.
Yeah.
So that was the home base of my father's sort of expediting service to the exploration companies, was out of Ross River. So that was where I lived, and George was shocked because you're looking for a CEO of this company that's in the traditional territory of the Ross River Denna Council, and you get introduced to someone who's been a geologist,
Yeah.
who's been in a...
How old were you at the time?
Let's see, that would have been 39.
39, and you've worked at IDM, so you kind of know how to navigate the exploration world, I guess. And
And Rob was a great mentor, and it's
was that when it sold, like around
just
the time?
so I left before it sold.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting. I think Rob's had some great success, but it's super interesting to track people who have worked for Rob.
Yeah.
Because he takes his mentorship and guidance, very seriously, and there's been a lot of.
So he's got a cool coaching tree, eh?
Yeah.
Robin's like spiders out.
Yeah. So, anyways, so the point is that I got a call from this George Grzinski a week after he interviewed me, and he said, like, look, we're talking to 6 people, but you're the only one from Ross River.
Yeah.
So do you want the gig? So it was an amazing opportunity for me because I'd never been a CEO before, and honestly, it's funny. I came back from London. I was working for Macquarie Bank there, and I was probably a little misguided or foolish or arrogant about what my opportunities were going to be when I came back to Vancouver.
Yeah.
Vancouver's a very network driven.
Yeah, it's hard to break into any.
And although I had a network, I'd been gone 8 years,
Yeah.
right? And
Did you want a finance position when you came back to Vancouver?
No, and in fact, that was a key reason I left Macquarie. I liked my coworkers at Macquarie. I just didn't like being in finance.
What were you doing there? Were you banking?
So I was in the metals trading side.
Okay.
So I would have been more origination and structuring, working with the traders and stuff like that. Some project finance work.
Okay.
They really wanted to get me more into hardcore derivative sales.
That's high. That's like high finance.
Yeah, I just didn't
not
find
the
derivatives.
sandbox,
Yeah,
right?
I just didn't find derivatives that interesting. So so I left. I came back. It turns out my network was useless in Vancouver, and that nobody cared that I was selling derivatives in London because it's actually not that transferable to junior mining.
I don't think there's a desk out in
No,
Vancouver.
no. I mean, there's a Macquarie team in Vancouver. There was for a long time, run by Chris Adams, who's left recently. The point being is that I was jumping from one crappy contract to another, and it got pretty grim for a while there, right? And it's pretty humbling when you've been working in high finance in London.
Yeah.
When you have your MBA from Oxford, and suddenly you're back in Vancouver, and 3 years later you're struggling to pay rent. You can't explain this gap in your CV. You can't seem to get a job back in finance because I was like, I'll just take anything at that point.
Yeah.
I ended up doing some construction labor to meet, to make ends meet. My friends would be like, well, isn't that real damaging to the ego to be doing that? I'm like, well, damaging to the ego is not making rent.
Yeah.
Right. So it was really lucky that, and interesting, Earth Labs plays a part in, the story because, I really recognized that I didn't have a network. So I'm like, well, how do I build a network from home unemployed? So I created a Twitter account. I started showing up on CEO.CA. And just trying to be useful, right? And so I, through that, I met Eric Coffin and I met Rob McLeod. And Rob hired me into IDM to manage the portfolio of Yukon projects they had picked up that had come out of then Ryan Gold became something else, and something in the Cisco group, and then ended up in IDM. Yeah,
is it White Gold now, or?
No, a different company. But point being is that using CEO.CA actually introduced me to people who gave me a job and then led directly to
Awesome.
Fireweed, and that's something I've passed on to younger people.
Yeah.
Not specifically CEO.CA, but that can be one venue, right? LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. It's like if you don't feel like you have a network, find some way to get involved and contribute. Right?
I've only been in this sector, but I found in the early days, people were very open to helping out someone who's interested, reaching out and answering questions. Is it this sector, or is it just, do you think people are just nice in general? Because my hit rate, just to have a coffee and, this isn't an interview. I just want to learn more about the sector.
I think this sector is a little better than average, right? Think about, when I was with Macquarie and I was trying to network with other banks or companies, and it was harder, right? And I think we have a very dynamic sector where people have a lot of things on the go, and that makes you very busy at sometimes, but it also at times makes you get some time in your hands, right? So having coffee with some, kid who emailed you and, wants to know more about the industry is, it's easy to take your time out of the day. And in fact, any one of us who's had some success has been mentored and people have helped us. To then not turn around and kind of pay it back, I think is inexcusable. I think that you have a duty, as you get further along in your career to be mentoring people. I think my mentors have been extremely important to me and I think continue to be important. And I like to, turn around and give back how I can, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a senior statesman of the industry yet, but I hope to be, and I hope to have created more people like me by, guiding their career.
Yeah, very cool. So that's a little a plug here for CEO.CA. He used it in a good way. Yeah. A lot of you guys are taking advantage of this platform and poo-pooing people. You know what? Don't poo-poo people. If you have good facts, like you can be on both sides of a company. I've been rolling up my sleeves and dealing with a little bit of moderation here. Be better, guys.
Well, I think be factual.
Yeah.
Don't be emotional. I think a lot of rooms can be quite negative.
Yeah.
A lot of rooms can be cheerleading, and I think there's, and not to name any names, there were some companies whose rise was not sensible.
Yeah.
And there was an inevitable crash. And for those of us who, felt kind of almost a duty of care, like you go into this room and you're like maybe pay attention to the spacing on these assays or whatever it is, right? And people just rip your head off.
Yeah, it's like, they don't like that.
It's like, I don't want you to lose money, right? I'm trying to help you. If you're not interested, okay, right? It's your problem, right?
Yeah,
so
but people should know that.
Yeah. So I think there has to be room for dissent.
As long as it's you're not going in there and just saying this is obviously a promote, but if you have actual facts that you can back your skepticism, it's a good thing.
Yeah,
and that's what investors should know, that
if you're approaching it as a discussion, right, rather than as an argument, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that was something, I was quite active in the fireweed room during my tenure as CEO, and until the board told me not to.
Why is it they're just scared that you were going to disclose information that you shouldn't?
I don't know. It was never really clear what their concern was. And this is something I kind of felt that I didn't want that room to be an echo chamber. I didn't mind people coming in with criticism.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've said this, when you're giving a talk and there's a Q&A period, no questions is a bad sign.
Yeah.
Right. And I always felt that I was a strong believer in our project and in our team and our backing and all that sort of stuff. And so I want to hear the tough questions because I want to face them. Right. And what everyone probably has the same tough question in their mind.
Yeah.
And if nobody asks it, they think you have no answer for it. Right. So you actually kind of want it asked, even if your answer is you're right, that's a serious risk, and this is what we're doing to manage it.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think echo chambers are good, and I think you can actually have a higher conviction of your trade when there's an actual open discussion. But anonymity in the internet creates crappy discourse.
Yeah, I agree.
Unfortunately, I think that I understand why people are anonymous or pseudonymous, but there's a psychology that we all fall prey to, right? That when we're behind a keyboard, we're like these keyboard warriors, and we would never talk to people like that in person, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think it's valuable. I think there's such great intel there, and I think it's an opportunity to use people as a sounding board for your ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we got away from the main topic a little bit, but this is about the rise. Yeah. And they gave you the job for Fireweed Zinc, or it was called Fireweed.
Fireweed Zinc. At the start. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was a slog for you right from the beginning, wasn't it?
It was interesting. There was actually a false start. So June 2016, I kind of got the nod, and then something had came up that we couldn't get Hudbay over the line. And everything fell apart, and this was crushing because I basically walked from my IDM job, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is it! I'm becoming a CEO. My career's changing forever," and it imploded.
Is this when they had the one asset McMillan and
Yeah,
you
so
did
the Tom and
yeah,
Jason deposits that we bought from
yeah,
Hud Bay.
and
So,
that's what kind of put everything together
yeah.
towards what was that like early 2000?
It's 2016,
Yeah.
and so we went public in mid 2017. So
Okay.
it was December, or it was maybe December 2016 that we actually got Hud Bay over the line and we got the deal done.
Okay.
So it was resurrected, and 2017 it was all about the first bit was all about the IPO.
Yeah.
So get that done and get the IPO done. We were trading very end of May or
How much did you raise for the IPO?
4 million.
4 million?
Yeah, it was 3.5. It was four. Yeah, I think. And it was pretty good share structure coming out of the gate. 18 million shares. Although we obviously owed a bunch to Hud Bay when we eventually were intended to finalize the payments and stuff like that.
So at that point, the brokers that put together the deal helped with the financing and stuff like
so it
that?
was Haywood that took us public. Yeah.
Okay. Did you have to do like anything? Like, did you have to find pockets of money yourself?
That one, no, because it was. I did a little bit, but it was more. I think everyone understood that IPO was priced well.
Yeah.
It was a 50-cent IPO, and on the first day we closed at 94 or something like that, right? Like we left a lot of money on the table, which I think leaving some money on the table was.
How did you get the spike though? Like, where did that come from?
Well, it was very clear, so 2017 was the beginning of a great run in zinc.
Okay.
And so we were launching into a very hot zinc market.
Oh, great timing then.
Yeah, you could just look at the historic resource on the Tom and Jason deposits and compare it to the peers at the time, and it was abundantly clear that the 50-cent IPO was way too cheap.
Okay.
Right? So, like I said, it's good to leave money on the table. I think in retrospect we left a little too much. There's a challenge of particularly IPO shares are free trading, right? So people who come out of the gate with an instant double, it's very tempting. And I think you see this in a lot of trading that you'd rather a nice steady climb than a spike up.
Yeah.
Because when it spikes up, people get, it's a sudden change and they're tempted to sell their shares, right? And so you want to turn over your shareholder base as slowly as possible. You want to keep people loyal and long term. So I think that sudden spike actually disincentivized loyalty. And then we kind of just traded down over 5 months from that 90-ish cents to I think we bought them at 62 or 63 or something. Yeah. And then we're off to a rocket. And then 6 months after that, we hit our all-time high at 214 or something.
Yeah. And then later on, you did, I guess, more strategic tuck-ins around the asset.
Yeah. So we started with about 50 square kilometers of ground, and it's very easy to say that we had this grand vision when we bought it, and that we created the company with this district thesis. That's obviously not true because I could claim that and it would seem logically consistent, but then why wouldn't I have done those property deals before we IPO'd? Why would I let the company run up and potentially allow people to play in neurology?
Yeah.
Right. If I really had a strong sense of that district play, it was that summer 2017 when I got introduced to Jack, and he started in September 2017. I think it was September, over that winter, he was kind of thinking a bit more about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So we, progressively grew the district over, 3-ish years, tucking in stuff.
Where did Mactung come from again? Okay.
So Mactung was sitting, the previous owner was North American Tungsten.
Okay.
So they had the Cantung mine, which is an operating mine, and they had Mactung, which is going to be their flagship. It was going to be this great thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the tungsten price got hammered, probably because of Chinese market shenanigans. Right, they were looking to put the Western producers out of business in 2015 or so, and so North American Tungsten went bankrupt. All the assets ended up with the government. So the government spent a lot of time trying to sell the two of those together. I'd mentioned to the NWT government, who had held Mactung, even though it's largely in Yukon, that if they were willing to sell Mactung only, we're interested. And I'd said that years before we bought it. And interestingly, I ran into a representative of the NWT government in Beijing, because he was marketing it there. I'm like, why are you marketing it here, right? Like this is exactly where you shouldn't be marketing it, right?
Yeah.
And the point I made to him is like, you should put it with a Canadian company, and we'll know where to market it. This is our living, right? And this is not because government people are not good, capable people. It's just this is not their skill set, right? You don't hand me the the business of the government, and you wouldn't hand the business of mining to the government, right? So I think they tried to run a process to sell the two together one last time, and it failed, and they agreed to sell us Macdonald directly.
Do you think, speaking of government, the Yukon government handled the Victoria Gold's heap leach failure the proper way?
Yeah.
Or was it just trying to mitigate how they look to the public?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? Like, we don't, I think it's an open question of could the Vic Gold team have pulled it out of the fire? Mm-hmm. It's tough, right? Like I think the first day a lot of us were looking at the photos, and just wondering how do they save this, right? And it's maybe they could have, and the government, with the First Nations, were pushing to, force them into receivership to the Ontario courts. And was that a little too early? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think it's been interesting to hear that there's been some strong anti-mining rhetoric out of the most affected First Nation, the Natchinaik Dam, but that there's also been the chief has been pretty clear at times that she feels that mining is a part of their economic future, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's going to be apocalyptic to the mining industry in Yukon by any stretch. And I think there was a comfortable tension between the Yukon government and the First Nations as well. Like, the government declining the request of the First Nation to do this ban that they were initially looking at. So I think everyone's trying to get the right thing done. I think the government's now saying that they expect Eagle to get restarted. I think some other First Nations have come out in support of other heap leach projects in Yukon.
I heard a lot of producers are circling already for that asset, but
that's
when
what I've heard too.
Like in the development of the mine, I thought everyone was very happy working together towards something that was gonna help the local community and stuff. And maybe this is just me, or maybe I'm biased because I'm in the sector. I just thought that they were almost thrown under the bus when everything happened together. It's just like, if you all do well together, I think you should support each other through the thick and thin.
It's tough. Vic Gold was a single asset company. Mm-hmm. A single asset company, when there's a serious disruption at your only asset, it is very hard to survive. Mm-hmm. Very hard, right? Like, there's just not a lot of cases where you can successfully survive that, right? And I think, and this is, the government undoubtedly feeling like they'd rather have multi-asset companies in the territory or anywhere, right? Like, because, you look at, say, Fireweed's Mac Pass or Eagle or something like that, or Valley with Snowline. Like, wouldn't you want a big mining company running those, where if something goes wrong, they've got a big balance sheet. It's not their only asset. You have a parent company guarantee. They've got a reputation to do things right and to make sure that they clean up, their messes, right?
Very good point.
So I think that, I don't know how that plays out in the permitting process, but it might eventually, right? Like, there may be different bonding requirements for single asset companies.
Yeah. Well, I don't think, unlike a lot of other failures in the mining sector, it feels like this wasn't in the public eye for too long. And I think that's kind of a good thing, because people love to perpetuate the dangers of mining and not look at what we need it for, which is essentially everything.
Well, and I think that, that John and his team worked so hard. Like, he's a force of nature, that guy. Like, they just made that project happen. And, him and Tara, his wife, very community-minded people, very involved, and unfortunate that it played out that way, for sure.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. So what are you going to do now that you're not with Fireweed anymore?
Never feels great to lose your job when it's not your decision. Mm-hmm. But, I had summer off, spent a lot of time with my kids. I'm very lucky that the success of Fireweed radically changed my family's finances. Mm-hmm. I'm, not rich, but I don't think we can even afford a house in Vancouver, but, we're on our way.
Yeah.
And I don't need to rush into the next thing. And I think with a bit of distance,
you can buy the guacamole at Chipotle and not have to count pennies and stuff. It's just like
and
put it on.
I'm good terms with John Robbins, the former chair, and Paul Harbridge, the current chair, although he wasn't, involved in my dismissal, still talk to the Lundins. And I think generally in life, business is business, right? There was nothing personal about the decision.
Yeah.
Grudges are consume your energy and provide no value, right? So we may end up working with them again.
Yeah, it's a small sector, right?
Yeah,
You're
I think it's a great victory to hand a project to the Lundin family. They are some of the best mine builders out there, right?
Yeah, well, if you're going to have to put it in the hands of any sort of operator, they know what they're doing, right?
Yeah. So, next, I don't know. I think like every boy and their dog, I'd like a copper project. It's tough. I'm open-minded. I might create my own company. I might join an existing company.
Yeah.
I definitely don't feel compelled to rush it. I think people waiting for my next deal, I would be surprised to see an announcement before Q1, Q2 next year.
You're just going to take your time and not rush into it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's like investing, right? You want to make sure that you pick the right thing and do your due diligence, but
there's nothing more depressing than trying to make a bad project work.
Yeah.
Like being that CEO that you're struggling to get the money to keep the lights on and your project's bad. It's very hard to unwind companies in junior mining. So it's very hard to declare something a failure and be like, it's failure, that's it, we're walking, right? It just doesn't work that way. So we have a bad habit as an industry of kicking the can down the road on projects that shouldn't have that done. And I don't want that to be me. I want something legit, right? So is that a legit exploration project? Do I pick up something that's the same phase of the life cycle like Fireweed, something in development? I don't know. Watch the space. I'm hoping it'll be interesting.
Would you do gold?
Yeah, I would. I'm less interested in gold, to be frank. Like I'm not one of these gold is money bugs, gold bugs. So my preference is critical metals.
Okay.
If I can do it.
All right. So if you have any cool projects, send them over to Brandon. If you have any cool companies, send it over to him. He's at the conference, shaking hands, meeting everyone as on the other side of the table, and he's giving it to the issuers, just like you guys did it to him.
That's right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.